So in this video, I'm going to be talking, take 5. Up until this point, we've been talking about the strategic communication strategy cycle. And we've been talking about the role of the communication strategist and communication manager. The strategist helps to coordinate what the strategy is with the operations and strategic branches of the organization. The manager begins to think about what's the strategy of all of the pieces? How does the funnel work? How do we begin to move people from where they are, the stakeholders from where they are, to where we ultimately want them to be in order to achieve our strategic goals? The role of the technician, though, shouldn't be neglected. The technician crafts beautiful messages, ones that grab attention. And ultimately, that's what we're going to be talking about today. How do you craft those messages? One of the things in the Worth textbook that you read for today was a model that helps you to think about what are really compelling messages for most stakeholders. And Worth puts forward the CRAM model. Now, that's not just what you do right before a test. CRAM stands for establish a connection, promise a reward, inspire action, and stick in one's memory. Easier said than done, right? But one of the pieces of the CRAM model that I particularly appreciate is this recognition that ultimately what you're after is to first make a connection with the stakeholder. Not to simply get them to do something, but to begin to establish a relationship with you as an organization or as an ambassador for that organization. When we begin to think about the ways that you develop messages, I actually really like the model that's put forward by Jennifer Aaker and Andy Smith in this wonderful little book called The Dragonfly Effect. And this has similar model elements to the CRAM model besides that element of establishing a connection. What they argue for is that in order to really have a message that grabs attention, you need to develop a message that cuts through the noise of social media and everyday media with something that's personal, something that's unexpected, something that's visceral, or something that's visual. And so those are questions that you can begin to ask yourself as you go through and look at particular messages. Are they really personal? Personal stories often grab attention very well. Are they unexpected? Are they emotionally compelling? Or are they visually just so attractive that you're drawn into them? The second piece of their model in this GET model is engage. And engage is all about that personal connection again. Ultimately, what you're after is to engage through deep empathy, through authenticity, and through telling a story. When you do that, you can begin to see how messages could become much more persuasive. Let's look at an example. And this is an example that comes from Jeff Brooks' book, The Fundraiser's Guide to Irresistible Communication. If you consider the statement on the left, right, this is a fundraising appeal for a nonprofit organization, all of those facts are true, but it's not really engaging content. There's nothing that promotes empathy. There's nothing that promotes a deep personal connection. But if you look at the content on the right, all of a sudden things become much more personal, and by doing so become much more visceral and engaging. The message on the right is much more likely to attract attention than the message on the left. The last piece of a really effective communication message is that it prompts the stakeholder who's reading it or who's watching it or hearing it to take action. And really what you want to do when you're crafting this message is to make that action as absolutely easy as possible. The fewer the number of clicks or places they need to go or things they need to do in order to make that particular action happen, the better. And you see this all the time if you've paid attention to appeals that come from nonprofit organizations. For example, you don't want to just hint around and say, your support could bring help to special kids. That's true, but if you get more specific, you're much more likely to get somebody to take action. Could instead you say something like, give $1.79 to share a hot, nutritious meal with a person experiencing homelessness in our community? That's much more specific, and it gives the person an idea about how much their donation would translate into a meal, and they can think about not only giving $1.79, but a multiple of that, depending on the amount of impact that they can make. Or you might think about, as we close in on a cure for this terrible disease, every gift, $25, $50, or any amount that's right for you brings the cure closer. Again, you're telling the person how much money that you're asking them to give. Similarly, when you're asking people to do things beyond just donate a particular amount, you can make it easy by creating systems that don't require people to use a lot of their cognitive capacity to make a difference. For example, if you want somebody to contact their congressman, but you don't tell them how, they have to figure out who their congressman is, figure out the contact information for them, a phone number or email, craft the message, and then actually execute it. There's 4 steps there. It's too many. In order to get somebody to contact their congressman, it's much easier to say, here's a system, enter in your zip code, and we will auto-populate their email with the name of your congressman and this particular message that can get sent to them. And here's a template for the email that you might write. By making it simpler, you're much more likely to get somebody to follow through on that action. So hopefully this is giving you an idea about the ways that you can use messages to get more attention for your nonprofit organizations and for other organizations that you're hoping to use communication in order to enable them to achieve their strategic objectives.